On this episode of Delivering Marketing Joy, we talk with Paul Bellantone from PPAI about what he and his team did when there was some anti-promo legislation and some secrets about PPAI Expo. Hey there, and welcome to another edition of Delivering Marketing Joy. I am your host, Kirby Hasseman, and joining me today is another repeat guest, a good friend of mine at this point, Paul Bellantone. He's the CEO and president of PPAI, one of our leaders in our industry. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it.
Kirby, it's always an honor to be here with you.
Awesome. So, we had kind of a kerfuffle in our industry not too long ago where, recently a senator proposed a piece of legislation banning the use of promo in government. And obviously it had everybody up in arms. Can you talk a little bit? I'm always intrigued about PPAI's role when things like this happen. So you can talk a little bit about that and what PPAI does in those situations.
So give you a little background on the piece of legislation. It was introduced on October 29th by Senator Joni Ernst out of Iowa. Mm-hmm. And it was cleverly called the SWAG Act, which is the Stop Wasteful Advertising in Government. Formerly, it's piece of legislation 2722, but it was the SWAG Act because it had that sexy name to it. And, who wants the government to spend money on swag?
Right.
And it didn't just target us. It actually hit a number of different advertising mediums. Specifically, let me back up a little bit. Generally, when these things happen, we're collateral damage. They're going after something bigger. And who does, who's in favor of wasteful spending? Not me, I'm a taxpayer. So it was to stop government agencies from promoting themselves. So, promoting the agency just for the agency's sake, and then promoting outside of its jurisdiction. And then it was the final thing was no mascots. They weren't able to create mascots. So somewhere there's a mascot association. I know that was probably as upset as we were. And so it just so happened that this piece of legislation, we get information on it. We track these things. A member will tell us something comes up. And it was October 29th. I happened to be going to D.C. that weekend anyway. I just moved my trip up by a day. But because we were on top of these things, and because a member, it was actually someone from Stephanie Critchfield from the Vernon Company. Mm-hmm. She was on top of it. She was able to meet me in D.C. She's out of Virginia. And we were able to get appointments with Senator Ernst's office as well as Rand Paul's office, who is the co-signer of the bill.
Right.
And what we did was we met with their staffers, which is generally the case, and we just said, we understand what you're trying to do. Nobody wants wasteful government spending. We're all taxpayers. We're all concerned. But here's the unintended consequences of what you're talking about.
Right.
And we always use the language that we agree with these types of cuts, but they should be done with the scalpel, not with the chainsaw, right? You don't just do the whole thing. Let's be a little bit more tactical. And what we were able to do, Kirby, was play on some language that they had actually introduced in the bill, because they had given some exceptions, except in the case where it was any of the military branches. It was anything to do with the census, which we've had very effective use of promotional products in the census. And I think the third one, it was military branches, recruitment and retention of staff. And what we were able to say is, well, it works. You're obviously saying it works. So why would you just say we need to stop all of these different things? Let's use those as case histories for other departments to effectively get things done under budget and quicker and retain and recruit employees. And they were willing to listen. And they weren't, obviously they weren't going to pull back the bill because we said so.
Right.
But we said, let us introduce language. Let us give you language that we think accomplishes what it is you're trying to do in a way that adds value across the board. And so that was November 1st, I believe we had that meeting. Within 3 weeks, we were back in their offices. It was our lobbyist in DC and Ann Stone, who's our chief legislative person here, and handing over our language, which basically said, you need to be able to show an ROI.
Right.
You need to identify what the benefit is up front, and it needs to be measured at the end. And if that's the standard that somebody's going to hold us to, bravo. That's what we want.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, when it comes to spending money, that's where we think that we're better than the other marketing, advertising mediums that are out there, because we can show ROI and we can actually measure success of our programs. So they pretty much have taken our language as submitted and will be inserting that into the red line of the bill. So we're pretty pleased. Second part of your question is, what do we do when this happens? Well, the first thing we normally do is, I guess we have some expletives under our breath.
Fair.
We feel bad for ourselves for about 10 minutes. Why are they picking on us? And then you go into your, first there's the triage mode of when you just say, okay, what do we need to do to marshal our forces here? What do we need to do? What's our next steps? And then after that, it's just you go by the playbook. And the playbook is you reach out, you talk to them about why this is important, why there may be some unintended consequences. And then when you try to get an audience.
Yeah.
Two things I would say stood out for me on this, Kirby. One is you forget until a situation like this that your government officials work for you.
Yes.
And they work for the public good. I think there's always an intimidation factor that you just say, oh, now I have to go, fight with these guys about this. It wasn't like that at all. Both offices were really open to saying, hey, you understand what we're trying to do, and you're trying to help us get there. And when you can approach it like that, I think you're in a win-win situation. Second thing, we did a couple of calls to action for our members to write these two senators and their own legislative officials. I think the number was about 1,400 members over the period of 2 or 3 days reached out.
Wow.
So they recognized that it wasn't just some lobbyist and some staff guy who were saying that this was bad, that it was actual constituents who one, vote with their dollars, but two, actually use those dollars to hire people in those communities.
Yeah.
So,
for what
we
it's
were
worth,
fortunate.
Yeah, I it's one of those things. I'm so glad you had a chance to tell me a little bit more about that. I appreciate your leaping into action. I certainly noticed right away. I was like, gosh, Paul's in Washington, D.C. already. So yeah, that's great. And again, I appreciate
Paul was fortunate. He just had to change his flight. He was going anyway.
But still,
So
good stuff.
Yeah.
So moving on real quick, you guys just finished up LDW not too long ago. Expo's around the corner. I'm curious, with all these different events, how do you and your team work to keep them fresh and valuable each and every time?
Kirby, I think it's an interesting question. And I was just actually talking to the team about it in a different context earlier today. We sometimes want to keep things fresher than they need to be. And I know that sounds
makes sense,
weird, but we're so close to it, and we'll have the same conversation about something 20 times before it gets out to the members.
Yeah.
By the time it gets out to the members, we're tired of it already.
Yeah.
And we want to move on to the next marketing message or the next show tagline or whatever it might be. So I think what we try to do is strike that balance between how much change is good and then how much do we really need to stay consistent with the theme. I'll give you Expo is one of those great examples. We've had the great to extraordinary theme now for 2 or 3 years. But when you think about how many people actually go to Expo, what they're focused on, it could be that people really aren't part of that messaging, or they'll see it for 3 days out of the entire year. And meanwhile, we've seen it in-house for the last the last year. It comes from hiring great people who care a lot about what they do is the short answer to that, Kirby. We have people who are really engaged in creating change and creating good for the industry. And I think that's what does it. So you were at LDW.
Yes.
And, you heard the messaging that we have and you've seen it. What did you think what resounded with you? over those couple of days?
For me, it was so LDW, for those listening, or is leadership development workshop
Right.
for the regionals, and it was, for me, the thing that really stood out was the vibe around the room with the other individuals that
Sure.
from other regionals that were doing different things. That's one of the things that I often take away from events like that. It's like, oh, other people who care about what I care about and are doing unique and creative things. So I think sometimes for me,
Yeah.
just by you guys facilitating that opportunity, that's what I got probably the most out of it.
And in terms of keeping things fresh, it's interesting you say that, because we tend to over program.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, let's get them a session on this, and they're going to be interested in a session on this. And in reality, it's you just put a bunch of people who care about the same issue in a room and back up, get out of the way, let them do what they do really well.
Yeah.
And it never ceases to amaze me that how the passion itself actually carries the ball forward a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. As you were talking, I'm like, yeah, I'm sure Jimmy Buffett is tired of singing Margaritaville, but you got to sing Margaritaville, right?
You got to sing Margaritaville. That's the hit.
That's right. Okay, final question for you. So we were just mentioned Expo, and the event is in January, so it's coming up very, very soon. What can people expect this year, and what do you enjoy most about it?
Well, I think they can expect to see incremental changes along the way. Obviously, the core of the show is those 3,300 booths and the new products and the excitement that's driven around the trade show. But we're finding new ways to deliver education. We're finding new ways to get people across the show floor to visit different booths. I mean, last year it was puppies and bacon and ice cream and pop-up booths. This year you're going to see pop-up education on the show floor, where we're actually have kind of these domed areas where people will be able to go in and experience education in a different way, a little bit closer to the show floor. I think we'll see more exciting pop-ups to help traffic move around the show floor. The other part of it is the education. We have over 110 sessions, education sessions, individual education sessions over the 5 days when you include education. There's the volunteer leadership. We'll have more volunteers at the event than ever before. So for us, if you notice nothing about the show but have a good experience, that means that it worked.
Yes.
And if you haven't been to Expo in a year or two, I think you'll see some significant difference, some exponential changes from year to year. But we are excited. The show continues to gain market share of the people who are attending shows and the companies that are exhibiting at shows. We get a larger portion year after year, and we're excited about that. It's a great kickoff to the year.
It totally is, Paul. You and your team do a great job of it, and I talk about that. Number one, it's always like a class reunion every year where you see people that you don't see all the time, but you get to see them there. And then the other piece is people who are going there and don't take part in the education. You guys have top-notch education, my session notwithstanding, but I always take a lot away from the education sessions there. And like you said, it's the beginning of the year. It's the perfect time to get fired up and get educated. So kudos on that.
So I'll give 2 tips to anybody who's listening to this before Expo, watching this before Expo.
Yes.
First thing is register by the 21st of December. We've instituted a fee. If you register after December 21st, unless you're in some of the large distributor groups that we work with individually, there will be a $50 registration fee. You do not have to pay the $50 registration fee. Just register before the 21st.
Right.
If you do that, and there's a reason for that, Kirby. We're instituting that. One, people are telling us they're getting too many emails from us about the show or too many phone calls. Look, just register now, and this way we can stop the emails and the phone calls. We're not going to otherwise. The second thing is we're trying to affect the experience that people actually have during the registration process. We literally have people who are buying airline tickets and securing hotel rooms, but still thousands of them don't register until they get on site. And if we can have that happen sooner in the process, then we'd actually be benefiting their experience.
Oh, yeah.
Second thing is we keep that registration area set up for 3 days, 4 days. By the 4th day, it becomes a little bit of an eyesore. People are putting their cups and trash on the counters. And as much as we try to clean it up, is there a more effective use for that space? And what we would like to do is break that down as the week moves on because people have registered in advance.
Right. Well, and
Second big
it's so
change.
easy too. Like once you get on the
Yep,
site, if you've pre-registered, I mean, you are in and out of there in no time.
it is. Hopefully, it's just kind of a pass through, scan it, pick
Yeah.
up your badges, move on. Second thing is the education events will not be ticketed this year.
Okay.
I think people in the past thought, well, I have this ticket. Why didn't I get a seat in the room? We ask people to tell us which education they go to so that we know what size room to put that session in. It's just to gauge interest. But people were falsely believing that just because they had the ticket, they were guaranteed a seat.
Mm.
So education seating is first come, first serve. You've heard it here. It's first come, first serve. So go early. Make sure you map out where you want to be, and we will seat people up until the fire marshal tells us to stop. So two things: register by the 21st. Get to your education sessions early.
I love it. I love it. Well, Paul, you've answered my 3 questions. Do you have one question for me?
I do.
Okay.
So I had thrown some goofy fact at you pre-call here. So
Yes.
today is the 9th of December that we're doing this. So
Yep.
there are 22 days left, not only in the year, but in this decade. The teens are done. Starting January 1st, we'll be hitting a new decade. I don't want your New Year's resolution. I want your new decade resolution. What will the next 10 years, what is your focus for the next 10 years of Hasseman life?
Wow, that's really good. So just to be candid, I didn't know this. So this is a great question. So next 10 years, what I would like to see us do, I would like to certainly double the size of Hasseman Marketing. I'd like to add an additional office in a new location. I'd like
Right.
to travel more. My wife and I enjoy traveling, and as of literally like a few months ago, we're sort of empty nesters.
Empty nesters,
So,
sure.
so my like, if I were to commit that, oh, and I'd like to do more speaking and writing. So for the next 10
Right.
years, I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but grow the business, expand the business, right? Maybe write another book and go see more of the world. How about that?
Pretty lofty goals. So I would challenge anybody who is putting something off and said, this decade I'm going to accomplish whatever. You have 22 days left, so get to it.
That is the most amazing stat. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I maybe thank you, maybe not, but yeah.
Maybe not.
Thanks for taking the time, man.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of Delivering Marketing Joy. We'll see you next time.